Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And some of you who are our regular viewers might realize that we've got a little bit of a different backdrop. Normally I do these from home, but I'm here at the store. So if it's a little different today, at least I still have books behind me. While those of you are getting notifications and joining us, I want to mention a few things coming up. The big thing that we're most excited about right now is Independent Bookstore Day. It's April 24th. At 1 o'clock that day, we're actually going to be back on here with a panel of all the Edgar Award Best Novel nominees. So it'll be at 1 o'clock. People will be joining us from all over the world for that. It's going to be pretty cool. In store that day, we'll also have a lot of the Independent Bookstore Day exclusive merchandise, including the I Love Independent Bookstores Blackwing pencils, a signed Nigella Lawson cookbook, a Baby Yoda onesie, and we'll have some other promotions going on during the day, including the tote bags and mugs and other Murder by the Book swag. So that is exciting. Mark your calendars. We will have our limit of 6 in store at a time and masks required, so just be patient with us. If you show up and we're packed, which hopefully we will be, we might ask you to wait outside for a few minutes till it's a little more clear to come in. Okay, so to our authors today, we are here celebrating the publication of The Three Locks by Bonnie MacBird, and she is joined by Leslie Klinger, who is a incredibly well-known Sherlockian. So I'm so excited about this conversation. Let me bring on Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie. So good to see you. It's been too long.
Yeah, it's really been too long. I wish we could be in person now.
Me too. I'd love that. I was just talking with some publicists this morning about what that might look like at some point. So fingers crossed it's coming back.
Yes.
A lot of people tuning in know who you are, but let me go ahead and get you introduced officially. Bonnie MacBird is passionate about Victorian London and Sherlock Holmes. She lives in an 1890 building right off Baker Street and fell in love with Holmes as a schoolgirl in her native California. After many years in the entertainment industry as a film executive, Emmy-winning producer and screenwriter, she now writes the critically acclaimed Sherlock Holmes Adventure Series for HarperCollins, bringing the much-loved detective back traditional style in full-length adventures. Meticulous research, a flair for deductions, and a decided sense of humor have turned these into fan favorites. And as I said, the new book in the series, there we go, get my perspective right, is The Three Locks, and we do have signed book plates to go along with that. I was having some technical issues. Normally I have our little banner underneath. I'll pop that on shortly, as well as put a link in the comments for those who want to purchase the book. Anyone who buys it from us will, of course, get the signed book plate. Our next guest is Leslie Klinger. Hi, Les. How are you today?
Good morning, afternoon.
Thanks so much for being here. Yeah. We're at all different times. Yeah. I'm missing my backdrop. Your birch-colored bookcases and books look like my normal office, so I feel very dark today. It looks great. So Leslie Klinger is one of the world's foremost authorities on Sherlock Holmes. He's the editor of the 3-volume The New Annotated Sherlock Holmes. The first 2 volumes, the complete short stories, won the Edgar for Best Critical Biographical Work. He's also the editor of the hugely successful The New Annotated H.P. Lovecraft. Klinger is a member of the Baker Street Irregulars and lives in Malibu, California. And his latest collection, edited, is In League with Sherlock Holmes, which we always carry all of his Sherlock Holmes anthologies, and it's also available at the link that will be in the comments. Okay, I'm going to do my behind the scenes work. Those of you who are watching, definitely put questions in the comments. There's no such thing as a dumb question. We'll get to them in a little bit. And I'm going to leave you to chat. Have fun.
Thank you. Thanks, McKenna.
Thanks. Well, welcome to America, Bonnie. So it's, I know you've missed it.
I have. I really have. And I've been in that very room with you before.
Yes, I was going to say, in the real world, Bonnie and I live very close to each other. So.
Right. Yes, in the real world, definitely we do.
In the real world.
Also, I want to just mention one thing, that the book plates that are signed that she mentioned that are in the books, that's your idea, Les. You told me to do that. And
Well,
yeah.
I learned it the hard way. Early on, people were coming to signings for me saying I wasn't going to carry 15 pounds worth of books to your signing list, and I felt guilty, so I created bookplates. Yes.
Yeah, and now it's working well in the pandemic because we can't get around. So, yeah, I'm so pleased because I really like to support the independent bookshops, and so
Absolutely.
this is the way to do it.
Well, so Bonnie, we kind of gave us a brief statement about how you met Sherlock Holmes, but please expand. Tell us how did you meet Sherlock Holmes, and how did you get interested in Holmes?
I was probably a little kid in footy pajamas watching television when I first saw Basil Rathbone. Probably. But shortly after, my mother took me to the library, and I took out tons of books, as much as I was allowed. And very early on, I bumped into Sherlock Holmes, and I was 10 years old, and I read A Study in Scarlet, and then I was hooked, read all of them, and just became madly in love with these characters and the stories. And I've just, throughout my life, and it's been a long time since then, I won't say how many decades, but many, throughout my life, I just keep reconnecting to Holmes with books and with movies and with TV shows. I mean, he just keeps surfacing. The character will not die. and every time I reconnect, I go back to the stories, the originals, and I reconnect to those again. And so, flash forward to, I guess it was 2010 or 11. 2011. I realized that I wanted to write a novel. I sat down to go, okay, I really want to do a novel. I'd done one before.
You'd been writing already. You just hadn't written a novel. You've been writing for many years.
Many years, yes. I was a story editor at the studios, so that is like a book editor only for scripts. So I did a lot of intense story work, which is really useful. And then I was a screenwriter for many years. I ran a production company for 10 years, and I did all the writing on all the projects we did. And then I taught writing at UCLA Extension, the special writers program there, which is a world-renowned program. It's really a good one. I couldn't recommend it more highly. And of course, some of the classes were online then. And of course, now all of them are.
Right.
But it's a really remarkable place to learn very high-level teaching. You've taught there, Les, also.
Yes, not quite so high level. I taught courses on Sherlock Holmes and Dracula, and they were for fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you taught a one-day course or something like that. But
I did a one-day course, but I also did an 8-week course.
Oh, yeah.
We were in depth.
Oh, interesting.
One of the great joys was I discovered that I was deeply disappointed to discover that I couldn't require the students to buy my book, but I could suggest it.
You could. You actually could.
They told me I could. So.
Oh. Because when I did it, I didn't have a writing book for them to buy of my own, but I had a couple of required and a couple of recommended texts. But I'm surprised because they like to sell books in the bookshop.
I could require them to own a copy of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I just couldn't say it had to be mine.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm surprised because the annotations on yours make it a whole other thing, really.
Absolutely.
No, seriously, because I don't know if any of the viewers haven't seen your editions of the originals. It's the annotations that just elevate the experience beyond just reading the stories.
Well, that's the idea, of course. The stories are widely available. I mean, you can find them in many different versions online, for that matter.
They're free. Yes.
All except in the U.S. the last 6 stories, but the annotations. I mean, I came to this, and I think you have told me that you did too, through the Baring Gould annotated edition, which came out in the 1960s, and that was where I discovered Sherlock Holmes and how I got hooked, and it was in part certainly the footnotes, the idea that there was this cult, this group of amateur fan scholars.
No, I didn't really get that, to be honest. I was so engrossed in the stories and the characters, and I looked up a lot of stuff because my parents had a huge, one of those giant dictionaries that sits on a stand. They had that in the living room, and I was encouraged to go look up any word I didn't know and then use it like within the next 24 hours, because they're trying to, improve literacy and whatever. So I did that. And of course, the Holmes books for a 10-year-old, there's a lot of words in there that, were expanding my vocabulary, one in particular, which we know. But, it was like, okay, so I would look these words up. And I was so into the stories and the characters, and that it was like a different route, I think, for me. I was just like, they became real to me. They became
Well, I discovered it when I was in law school, which is the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, I was sort of, focused on details at that point because that's what lawyers do. But
right. Yeah, coming to it as an adult, that's got to be somewhat different because I was just immersed in story. As a kid, story. And then, of course, I kept with that. That is my thing. It's just story, really.
So there you were, maybe 10 years ago, deciding you wanted to write a novel. Well, that's a big deal to go from writing a novel to deciding to write a Sherlock Holmes novel. I mean, how did that happen?
I think, let's see. Well, I had seen House not too long before that. And House reignited. I kept, as I mentioned, get reignited into the stuff. And House reignited that. I remember watching that show, and the first 10 minutes of the first episode, I was like, that's Sherlock Holmes. and then Hugh Laurie is so appealing and interesting and layered and wonderful. So I love. Okay, so it was already kind of back in the saddle, I guess, and thinking. And then I think the Downey film came out right then.
Right.
And I raced to see that. I remember it came out at Christmas, and my husband's brother's family were staying with us. We're doing Christmas, and this came out. It's like, we're going to go see that. It's like, no, nobody wanted to go see that. Robert Downey Jr. is Holmes, come on, and it's commercial. And blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, we have to see this. And I forced them all into the theater. They loved it, of course, because it's a great movie. and I know you worked on it, Les. Anyway, so I just got reignited. And, people will argue endlessly about which actor is right and which actor isn't and which adaptation is correct and, true to the originals, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, that movie I so enjoyed it. And then I went back and read them all again for the millionth time. And then when I decided to do the novel, I thought, okay, I'm going to be spending at least a year, maybe 2 years, ended up taking 2 years, with these characters. Who do I want to live in a room with alone, just sitting there by the hour? And it was just clear to me I wanted to try that. But
had you read Sherlockian pastiche? Had you read other people's besides Conan Doyle?
Yeah, I had. Of course, I was at Universal when the 7% Solution was done. I don't know if you knew that.
I did.
I read the script. Yeah. I mean, yes, I was. And yes, I'd read a few pastiches, and I was kind of picky about them. Most of them I didn't like too much, and there were a couple that I thought were quite good. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. He's gone now, sadly, an English guy. There were some that I liked. But I kept returning to the originals, and I thought, I want to try doing this. But I like the challenge of writing to form. Now, screenplays are very not formulaic, because then they're boring.
Right. No, but you have to do them a certain way. Yeah. Yeah,
they're a very structured way of storytelling, and there are definitely some things so that it's a teachable thing. But of course,
you can't have a lot of. He thought to himself about things. You can't do that on the screen.
No, it's only what you see and what you hear. That's it. That's all you can put down on the page. But I mean, you can do it in such a way that you imply the tone,
of course,
humor, and so forth. But anyway, and the pacing. But in any case, I just really I like to write to form. I like to write sonnets, because they're so incredibly, it has to be A, B, A, B, B, C, D, C, D. It has to be a certain way and certain number of syllables. And, I write haiku to warm up sometimes as a writer. So I like to write to form because in art, there's a thing called freeing constraints. The minute you have a lot of rules to follow and you have to stay within them, suddenly you can be crazy free within that. And sometimes great creativity actually comes from that.
Does that mean you're an outliner, by the way?
Am I an outliner? No, I'm not an outliner.
I would have thought that was the concomitant, that's sort of the ultimate form is the outline, and then you're free within the outline, but...
I don't outline first. I now actually over the 5 novels, or the 4 that I've finished, and I'm in the 5th now, I've evolved my process some, but it's come from my screenplay writing, because a movie is a long form. So structurally, I use a kind of 3-act model. So although I don't outline, I definitely know like what the big crime is and who did it. I don't know yet how Holmes figures it out, when he figures it out. I don't know. And I always want a big action scene because a long form demands that.
And no spoilers here. We always know there's certain few things. We know Holmes isn't going to die. Watson isn't going to die. Right. Neither one of them is going to give up their profession.
Right.
We know. How do we know? Because there's other stories.
Yeah, that's the standard. It's the gold standard, Les.
That's right.
We also know we're going to get deductions, and we also know that they're good friends, and there's going to be lots of sparks around that of various kinds. We also know that Holmes is a mystery, and we're desperately looking for clues to him, because that's one of the things we all do as readers. All of us fans, we read like, oh, he wears this, and he doesn't like that, and we don't know this about him. So we're scanning for clues to the mystery of Holmes. So those have to be sprinkled in, and I decided they couldn't contradict anything that was in canon. But there be some, because that's the joy, one of the joys, right? What does he really think about this, that, and the other? And what does that mean about him? And then also the mystery of their relationship. So I think that it's just, there's so much stuff that you have to kind of adhere to do that. But within that, there's great freedom. And the other thing that I love about, 2 things that are the most fun for me, is that Conan Doyle was hilariously funny. and coming back to those stories as an older person, I got more of the humor. And as a kid, you're just reading the adventures and maybe a little laugh here and there, but it's the adventure. But as you get older, you realize how incredibly witty and funny these stories are. So that was one thing, was to connect to that humor. And then the other, it's a bunch of things really, but at that time, right at that time in that period of history, science was just in the most exciting phase. It's like now in a way. There's like now in like the neurosciences, for example. It's just cutting edge, great stuff is happening. So it was fun to be able to put that in. And Holmes is an amateur scientist, and so in this book, for example, they bump into some scientists at the Cavendish Laboratory, which is a pretty famous laboratory in Cambridge. And one of the scientists there immediately recognizes Holmes as an amateur scientist. He says, "You probably have a Bunsen burner in your sitting room." Dismissively.
Yes, doesn't everyone?
Doesn't everyone have? Yeah, exactly. And so, but this is fun with this stuff, with the science of the times. But then there's a cozy element to these books, in that they wrap around and we get a satisfying end.
They're comfortable. That's a nice point. We know they're not going to be ultra violent. We know they're not going to end in despair. Probably, although there is,
they could touch into melancholy though, definitely, and
absolutely.
in this book, in fact, a little bit.
Things don't always work out the way that we'd like. I mean, certainly in the original stories, that's the case. Some of them, there are, I would call them satisfying endings. Isn't that wonderful? Good prevailed and things are neatly tied up. Sometimes it's not that neat.
Yeah, it's not that neat, and so sometimes Holmes doesn't even save the client. Sometimes the client can die.
Exactly.
But in that case, he makes sure that justice is served.
And all he can do is sort of curse you, Moriarty. or something like that.
Yeah, or just, I was thinking of The Dancing Men, for example, where he kind of blew that in a way, but he made sure that
or the Five Orange Pips, another one, right? Where these bad things happened and he didn't stop them.
So they're not all predictable, which is good. So you want that, I think, in a novel too, because you don't want to have to know everything that's going to happen, but you're going to land back at 221B, and there'll be a recap or some kind of denouement that is.
Do you start out with an agenda? Do you have an agenda of some theme that you want? I'm not talking about the plot. Yes. I'm talking about, do you have a theme that you want to explore in a particular book?
Yes, and that's a really good question, Les, because you don't typically think of themes as being strongly presented in mystery fiction.
Well, not in older mystery fiction. Certainly a great deal in contemporary mystery fiction.
Yes, more so now. These were kind of escapist things, but I do have a theme in mind, and I actually start with the theme. I start with the theme. I pick the date of the story, and the time of year, and I have a theme, and then I have the main crime in my head that will tie into the theme, and then I know who did it, and then I have to concoct why they did it and how they did it, and then how he figures it out, and how it's he has to get it wrong. I mean, we and Holmes have to get it wrong for a while until we get it right.
Of course, we wouldn't want to have you give any examples of these because we want people to buy every one of your books. So,
but I can talk about themes, for example. The first one was this is the thing that attracted me to doing the first book was that the idea that people with artistic temperaments, which Holmes definitely has, are often misunderstood, but they have almost special powers because of this artistic ability, but they also have vulnerabilities because same thing. And so it's the Janus side, flip sides of the artistic temperament. And I wanted to explore that with Holmes, but also in the broader story. So there were quite a few artistic people in the story. There was an art collector, there was a famous singer, and there was, so there were people who were, and then there was another doctor and his Florence Nightingale trained wife. So there were people who had, extreme talents and so forth. And I was really interested, especially, of course, with Holmes. What's the trade-off to have that artistry? And artists can see things that other people can't see, and they make patterns out of chaos. Like our friend Chuck, the artist Chuck Kubasik, he can look at a landscape, and in a few strokes, boom, he's distilled it into a thing of beauty, a simpler thing of beauty. So artists can do that. They see patterns, they can distill, they notice details, they notice the differences, and they're very sensitive. Remember that scene in the first Downey Sherlock film where he was sitting in the restaurant and the world was too much with him, and he just had to shut it out. And I thought that was a really good scene because I feel like Sherlock Holmes is that kind of person. He's got the antenna out so far, it's painful at times. So of course he takes in things that other people don't. So anyway, there's that, and then of course there's also the issue of the bipolar quality of this character,
right.
The manic energy on a case, and then the almost despair and lethargy when he's not on a case. That's very typical of the artistic temperament. There's a wonderful book by Kay Redfield Jameson called "Touched by Fire," I think it's called, and she's a professor she was at UCLA when she wrote this, and she's bipolar herself, and she talks about the relationship of manic depression and creative outputs, because there's a great deal of correlation. A lot of writers are on the bipolar spectrum. There is a spectrum too of this, of course. So she talks about that, and so I really believe this is true, and that Holmes is what we would call bipolar now, or manic depressive. So what are that gives him a certain vulnerability, but also incredible stamina. So that was the theme for that one, and that one was probably the strongest theme. On the second book, Unquiet Spirits, I just immediately got the pun of spirits being whiskey and ghosts. And so I set it in a kind of haunted castle up in Scotland, purportedly haunted, because I'm of the same opinion as Holmes. There are no ghosts, but and that is connected to the whiskey business. And so the theme of that one is like, what if we let ghosts of our past haunt us? Like, what if we don't put them to bed? And should we? If we let things that trouble, things that were undone or unsaid or left unfinished, those are ghosts in our past. And what if we just try to push them aside? They come back to haunt us. So that, in fact, pertains to something that comes up about Holmes's past. Something that I thought was interesting and fun, and yet doesn't contradict canon or the way he is with women or anything else. But it has a little bit of bearing on it. So that was a fun one to bring theme into. And then and the third one, The Devil's Due, that one was slightly less thematic, but it was touching on the idea of to what degree will we cross the line to do what we think are good works? Like, are some crimes justified, right, to stop bigger crimes, or to this, that? And of course, Holmes occasionally breaks in and he takes the law into his own hands a few times in the canon. So it's basically that and then do we have to pay the devil for this? Do we owe for this if we cross that line? And where is that line? And then what does it cost us? So that's kind of a bit more of the theme of that. And so, I don't want to give that one away, because that, kind of resolved that to the end of that story. So yeah, I do have these themes in mind. And I
this current volume, I would say, you didn't ask me, but I would say that theme was in significant part about women and the expectations for women, the role of women. And so the Victorian times are a perfect backdrop for that, because it is a burning question of the time.
It was hotly debated, fought, literally fought. And some very interesting things happened in Cambridge, for example, where much of the story is set. There were, just around this time, there was Girton College and Newnham College were women's colleges, but they had some of the same professors, but they couldn't get any degree or anything, and they were derided very strongly by most of the male students and the professors. And so there was a wonderful play called Blue Stockings about this that Jessica Swale wrote. Anyway, so there were these women trying to get degrees. There was also some pretty horrible stuff, kind of a horrible situation in Cambridge where there was an actual jail called the Spinning House, an unofficial jail. And it was run by the university, not by the police. And they would throw young women in there who were caught out in the streets after curfew and or talking to any students. And they declared that these are women of the streets. They were prostitutes. Right. And they were
definitely prostitutes.
Definitely prostitutes.
Obviously prostitutes.
Right.
So
and
what other reason would you have for talking to a man?
Yeah, exactly. Or being out. It's kind of like now, unfortunately.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's like walking outside while being a woman, right?
Yeah. The 19th century, the late Victorian period is a very convenient palette for just about every contemporary. When I say contemporary, I mean modern, our current issues.
Yes.
The Victorians were no strangers to these issues, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the rights of women or class distinctions or the role of, I guess we wouldn't quite describe the United States as an empire, but but it acts like one in many respects. And
Yeah.
what is the proper role for us in other nations and other cultures, and so
Yes.
on. So they're all
Exactly.
there. All of the contemporary questions we're wrestling with today are
Yes.
there in the Victorian period.
Yes, yes. And of course, in England, the class distinctions are even stronger, and they still are more so than in our country. I've noticed that. It's definitely still the case. But what I love about Holmes is that he slips seamlessly between classes. I mean, he's a gentleman. He dresses and speaks and acts like a gentleman. And his family are country squires, and we really know nothing more than that. But they are landowners, so he's of a certain level of comfort.
So what do you dislike about other people's pastiches? Or, and I don't mean other in general. I mean, what do you dislike in a pastiche, and how did you avoid it yourself?
Yes, I set the lines in the sand I set for myself are really clear. I didn't want to do any anachronisms. I mean, it's very easy to do them and hard to sometimes discern, but guarding against anachronisms. But also doing good deductions is key, because that's part of the fun. And that's one of the things, we Sherlockians look for. It's like, how do you figure that out? And he's got to be smarter than the reader. So, but I'm the writer, so I got to figure this out. And I do this by working backwards, obviously. And
of course, yeah.
So how else can you do it? But so good deductions that are real, not the fake ones. I can tell by the dew on the end of your nose that you were at that bakery yesterday. It's like, people will make up random stuff.
Right.
And it's like, no, it can't be fake deductions. They have to be real. And then also I don't want to reuse the ones that Conan Doyle did. That's another pastiche thing that people do. And I don't want to do that. Don't want to make the characters sound or act or in a way that they don't. They're not going to fall in love. Holmes is not going to fall in love and get married. He's not going to, I'm writing traditional pastiche. That doesn't mean I don't like other variations. I know you and I disagree on BBC Sherlock hugely less, but I loved BBC Sherlock.
But there are many. Our friend Laurie King, for example,
yes,
who very successfully had Holmes fall in love and get married.
Yes, and it's wonderful, and she has a great series, and it's it's fabulous. But I'm setting out to do a different thing. I'm setting out to do traditional Holmes, and so I'm going to keep him unmarried and unencumbered. But he's a man. He's human. And, he notices women. Watson really notices women.
I really like the sex scenes that you've done, though. They're
There are no sex scenes.
Well, that's what I like about them.
No, there are no sex scenes, but there are sparks occasionally. And he comes up against a very interesting young woman in this particular one. A woman, in fact, I don't know, maybe that's a scene I could read, but a young woman who's run away, and she's 18. She's very headstrong and very angry because she has a kind of an awful father, an awful family situation. She's got a terrible sister too, and she runs away and she makes a plan. And the problem is it hurts a lot of other people what she does. And Holmes is worried for her safety. She's been threatened, and there are lots of people who are justified in being really angry with this girl. And he's tries to talk some sense into her. Not that she should be conservative and behave. He's not trying to do that, but he's like, you're making a lot of people really angry at you, and you have other options. You don't really need to do that. And she's like, so there's an interesting, he bumps against this young woman here, and so I like interesting female characters, and it's quite fun to place them in these stories actually.
Let's talk for a second about location. You've moved Holmes around a little bit. He's not just sitting in his flat in Baker Street. How do you choose the location? And obviously you end up doing a good deal of research. This is, of course, the best part for writers. As we all know, writing is a great, you get to take trips and say, well, they're research.
Exactly. I think Lori goes to many exotic places.
Oh, yes.
I mean, she has a lot of fun with that.
Her new book is set in Transylvania, where she just happened to have to go to do some research.
Happened to have to do that. You know, I had to research the whiskey business very carefully.
I understand.
I went to the island of Isla. It's spelled Islay, but Isla. And you know, I toured whiskey distilleries, and I actually went to Isla because in Isla there is a distillery that uses the 19th century equipment. It's still extant and it's working. So I had to see that, you know. But yeah, I do go to the place, and it's very much like location scouting for a movie. So it's partly to gain, you know, real textural ambience of the place and look and the smell. Because I mean, you know, 5 sense writing is very powerful. You really need the whole thing.
So where is the Three Locks set?
The Three Locks is set in London. In the East End, there's the Wildens Music Hall, which is a real place, and is now currently restored to like what it was at that time, and they have shows there. And then Cambridge. So I went up to Cambridge. Unfortunately, I only got one short trip, and then the pandemic hit. So I have a stack of books that is miles high, and you know, has Victorian photographs and maps, and I got all Brazilian maps and stuff. But I went there, and I had in mind just the name, the Jesus Lock, tickled me. I was like, that name is so, I don't know, crazy. And it's like, what is the Jesus Lock? So it's a lock in the river that changes the level, of course, so that boats can get through. And it's in the back of Jesus College. That's what it is. It's been there forever. And so it's a really creepy place because there are these sluices, these drains that pull the water out to change the level, and they're quite dangerous actually. And a very weird thing happened is that the day that I was there to photograph the thing and learn about it, a woman had drowned in it like the week earlier. So I mean, my idea of it was not unrealistic actually. It hadn't happened.
Oh, convenient.
Yeah, how convenient. Yeah, but the point is, I saw this place, and I saw it as a possibility for a very dramatic scene, and so a scene kind of came to my head like while I was standing there, like what could have happened there, and
wow. I can't ask for more from a location than to be evocative.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I had the same reaction when I visited Isla and the big vats of stuff for the whiskey distillery. So
this would be a good place to murder somebody.
That's right, murder somebody. And then also the other thing that I came across in Scotland when I was researching up there was I discovered there was a castle that was a medieval castle, but it had been redone on the inside in the late Victorian era. So it was exactly the castle that was in my head. So I went there and took copious notes and pictures. And outside there was this little mound, and there was like a little hobbit house. And I'm like, what is that? And they said, oh, that's the ice house. And so I went in, and you can open the door, and then there's this huge dark pit, and in it they stored ice for the whole year. Ice down in there.
I think this is what happened to Conan Doyle, by the way, when he went to the Reichenbach Vaults. He took a look at it and said,
yes. Yeah, perfect. It's like, here's the scene, like the whole scene. I can see what happens, and he falls here and he climbs, and
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, the ice house. I didn't even know there was such thing. So then, of course, I researched the heck out of it and got all the details. I have pictures of what the thing, how deep, and stuff. So I don't put all that in there, but it's like the bottom of an iceberg. The tip of it is the story and what you see and read. But I have this other batch of information. So for example, in the distillery, the distillation process creates carbon monoxide, and there's areas in the distillery where it will all sink to the bottom, and if you go walk over there, you just die. So you just breathe it and you die. So, I mean, there's things like that you find out from going places and
right.
talking to people that are doing the stuff. And I have to say, it's so fun. I also went to, for the Scottish one, I went to a museum that had Victorian medical body parts that were designed so that the medical students of the time could see the effects of weird and unusual diseases that they might not run into in their everyday practice, but they wanted to know what they looked like. So they had every weird
useful,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, but they were preserved in alcohol, which was the reason I went there, to understand about preserving in alcohol, which you'll have to read the book to know why I wanted to know that.
Yes.
But I mean, but they had, I said to the person curating the thing, I said, so which is your favorite? Because they had a little bit of a, a mash sense of humor about this.
Yes.
I said, so which is your favorite, exhibit here? And they said, oh, this one. Come over here, and it shows me the things. And they said, do you know what that is? And I looked at this thing in a jar, and it's like, I don't know what body part that is. I mean, normally I can tell, but I don't know what that one is. What is that? They said, it's an esophagus. I said, well, what about it? And he said, well, this was a sword swallower. And he messed up. It was like,
you don't throw away all your research. I know you actually have created footnotes for some of your research.
Inspired by you, I did create footnotes, and they're up on my website. And the last two, Leah Cummins Gwynn has helped me with, because I've run out of time. But yes, I do have them up there, and they're, I think, pretty funny. And quite a few of them are based on my research and things that I found, crazy stuff that I found, either on site or in books. I go to the Wellcome Library a lot here because that's medical research.
Oh, it's a great library. I was there for research on Dracula because I needed to know about Victorian medicine.
Yes.
There's a lot of it in Dracula. So,
yeah,
Bonnie, I'm looking at the clock. Do you want to do a reading for us, perhaps, and then we'll take some questions?
Sure. Yeah, I don't see questions. Do you see any questions coming in? I don't.
I can't see them. I don't know if they're there or not.
McKenna
has the questions.
I have all the questions. You do your reading, and I'll come on with the questions later. I'm going back away.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. All right. It's okay.
Preferably from your book.
Preferably from the book, as opposed to just
as opposed to reading, some poetry or something. So yes.
Poetry. So I had different classes for that. Yeah. So I'm going to read something because I read something last night that you heard. I'm going to read something different. So a young woman has disappeared, and she has 3 suitors, and one of them is a young deacon who doesn't have a chance in hell to get her, but he carries the torch, and he's come to London and begged Holmes to come help find this girl who's missing. And he comes the first time, and Holmes turns him down. The second time, though, he comes and brings a baby doll with him. It's her baby doll. It's designed to look like her, and it was found floating in the Jesus lock with its arm missing. And something had been written on the body of it, but it's blurred in the water. And Holmes says, okay, now this looks like something's happening. I'm coming. Okay. So he comes, and he goes to the family of the young woman, and they don't know where she is, and the father doesn't really give a damn because she's always disappearing, and he's written her off. But Holmes is a bit worried, so he goes up. So he asks for the maid to come up with him, and they go to her room to look around. Okay. We were escorted upstairs by the young servant. Holmes paused in the hallway at the entrance to the missing girl's sitting room, and beyond it, her bedroom. He glanced across the hall to what looked like a similar suite, but this one with a closed door leading into the bedroom. Sister's rooms? Holmes asked the girl. Yes, Miss Atalanta. Older? By 2 years. Atalanta's 20. We next entered Dilly's sitting room. Dilly's the missing girl. And we passed through to her bedroom. It was a large, airy room with windows on 2 walls, the leaves of a large plane tree next to the window, providing a lacy screen through which another grove of trees was visible at some distance. Behind that, the beautiful cam glittered in the bright morning sun. The furniture, including the canopy bed, was all white, and the bed was made up. On it sat several dolls with a vacancy where the drowned doll must have resided. Holmes's magnifying glass was out, and he began his typically minute examination of the room. He started with the windows, opening each in turn and examining the sills. As I waited for him to do this, I perused the bookshelves. In addition to Greek and Roman history volumes, which I assumed had been influenced by her famous father, there were the usual Jane Austen, George Eliot, Dickens. But there were also 2 colorful rows of novels and poetry I did not recognize, presumably aimed at young ladies. They had titles such as Penelope's Terrible Surprise, The Tragedy of Annie Lamont, and Faded Blossoms. I looked idly at Dilly's dressing table. It was impeccably neat. In fact, the entire room was. Holmes asked the maid for a glass of water, and then as soon as she was gone, he went through the bookshelves like an automaton, stopping to study the careful collection of girls' novels. He examined 1 or 2, opened one, lingered upon it briefly, then pocketed it. From another pocket, he retrieved a small notebook, silver pencil, and made some notes. He then looked under the bed, examined the carpet, and inside the closet. He was looking through the lady's shoes when the maid returned. Holmes, I signaled. He looked up and smiled at the nervous girl. Ah, my water. Please come in and tell us your name, said he. Polly, said the maid with a slight curtsy. She served him a glass from the silver tray. She was a fresh-faced girl of perhaps 16, with red hair tucked away in a neat knot under her maid's cap, freckled hands clenched nervously before her. I'm Sherlock Holmes, this is Dr. Watson. You're a lady's maid, then? Yes, sir, for Miss Adelia and Miss Atlanta. I noticed the girl's distinct discomfort. You may be wondering why we're here, I said. Miss Adelia's doll was found in the Jesus lock, Polly. We're concerned for her safety, and we hope to discover something that will help us to find her. Girl nodded. Holmes, in his usual manner, leapt in. I understand that your Dilly, Miss Adelia, disappears on a regular basis, said he. I wouldn't say regular, sir, but yes, she's done so before. Holmes moved to Miss Wyndham's dressing table. Where's her hairbrush? Something to clean her teeth, pomade, powder, a number of personal items one expects to see are missing from this table. Are they not? The maid remained silent. Holmes scanned the room. There's no sign of violence here. She was not abducted. She packed to go somewhere, said Holmes. That's a good sign. Might she have taken the doll with her? No, sir. She never liked that doll, sir. Holmes looked up sharply at her. Then the doll was still here on Monday? The girl nodded. When did you notice it gone? It's Tuesday, sir. When exactly? Night, 9:30, sir. What were you doing in her room on Tuesday night? The girl shifted uncomfortably. I often checks all the rooms, sir, before I goes to bed, to make sure no lights are left lit, close the windows. What did you do when you discovered the doll missing? I felt sick. Somebody were in the room, a secret like. I was scared. Perhaps Dilly herself returned for the doll. No, sir. Like I said, a shy smile. It's her mother likes dolls, not Odelia. Holmes shrugged. But anyone could come in. What about her sister or Mrs. Wyndham? Why did you not first think of a family member? The girl hesitated. That window. She pointed to the largest adjacent to the tree. It was open? Yes, a little. But not when you tidied the room earlier. No, sir. Holmes moved to the window, examined the lock, opened it, shut it. He stood motionless for a few seconds, then turned back to the girl with that piercing stare that intimidated all who encountered it. And what of yesterday, when Deacon Buttons arrived at this house with the drowned and dismembered doll? What time was that? I forget. Of course, Holmes forgot nothing. The girl hesitated. He did not take his eyes from her. 9 or so, said she. Mrs. Wyndham did not hear of the doll until 10:30, he said. Where were you in the hour and a half between Deacon Buttons arriving with it and when her parents were informed? The girl froze, eyes wide. Holmes sighed and made an effort to soften his approach. His voice took on a gentler tone. You were not worried about Dilly before this, Polly? Not really, sir. Young lady, I believe you know more than you're telling us. This doll is disturbing. Your mistress may now be in danger. I suggest that you know where she's hiding. And between 9, when the drowned doll showed up here with the deacon, and 10:30, when the Wyndhams were informed, you went to see if she was all right. And you took the doll with you so that Deacon Buttons could not alert the parents just yet. You then returned to the house and alerted her mother. Have I got that right? The girl was preternaturally still, like a small wild animal that wishes to be invisible. I take that as a yes. How is it that Deacon Buttons allowed you to run off with the doll? I just did it before he could stop me. He found me on the way back, though. He offered to escort me through the streets so I would not get caught again. And caught? The girl looked down and blushed. Caught by whom? She hesitated. And the Proctor's men. Oh, yes, of course, I'd forgotten, said Holmes. At my puzzled look, Holmes explained, there's a kind of private police force run by proctors from the university. In the interest of keeping moral order, they arrest random young women seen to be consorting with students after curfew. An indiscriminate sweep, I'm told. Many are shops girls, servants, innocent working girls. They hold them without charges in a private prison called the Spinning House. And in our modern times, I thought, an outrage. That could be dangerous, continued Holmes. Have you been stopped before, Polly? Perhaps on an errand for your mistress? Polly nodded and looked down, ashamed. "'Twarn't her fault, sir. I was stupid. I stopped to ask directions, and a young man, he started to show me the way, and I were arrested." The trembling increased, and a tear escaped her eye and ran down her face. She swiped it away. "It was a close one, sir. I was let off with warning." I wanted to know more of these proctor's men, but Holmes pressed on. "Well, that was fortunate. Yet you risked another arrest last night. Why did you go alone to your mistress?" "Miss Adelia, she wanted Mr. Buttons not to know where she was." "I see," he said. "Well, that was brave of you, Polly. Your mistress may be in a bit of trouble." The maid looked at her feet and refused to reply. "Help us to help her," Holmes whispered. Polly stole a glance up at him. It was telling, even to my eyes. "Hello," came a low-pitched female voice from the doorway.
Whoa.
Excellent.
Well.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, we do have some questions, so let's go ahead and get to those. I'll put them on the screen and read them aloud. So you talked a little bit about this, but Heather Ann was wondering, who has been in the top 5 favorites representing Holmes in film for you both? She's partial to Peter Cushing. Bonnie, why don't you start?
Okay.
Or Les, either one of you, whoever has your 5 ready.
As long as we don't have to, I'm sure we'll agree if we don't do them in order. So.
Oh, so many, really. I love so many of them. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised by William Gillette, honestly. I love, in the really old times, Eileen Norwood. I love Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, the chemistry there. I love Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. But probably my favorite is Jeremy Brett. But they're all very close. And I also love Hugh Laurie, and I think of what he did as House, as Holmes. So just those are a few, but I like some of the other ones as well. How about you, Les?
I think, again, not in order and just Holmes, because when we bring Watson in, it's a whole different situation. So it would be Brett, Rathbone. If we're just talking about the actor, I did like Cumberbatch. We don't have to get to the scripts. And certainly Peter Cushing. And then it gets a very broad field.
Christopher Plummer
was wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful Christopher Plummer.
I loved him in that as well.
But so many. Peter Cushing would certainly be up there. Too short, but just what a powerful personality.
Yeah.
So we cheated. We had more than 5, and it was a mushy answer, but there you go.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. For both of you, do you have family or friends help edit your books?
Absolutely.
Mine go through the ringer before I send them to the publisher. So I run them. I'm in a writers group, professional crit group, and I run it through them. I run it through a couple of editors, and at the very end, I have my husband read it. He's my severest friend, and that greatest critic, whatever.
I was just writing an introduction for a book in which I was talking about ghostwriters, and someone said to me, Dick Francis actually used his wife she did a good deal of the writing and all that. And I said, well, spouses don't count. We all totally rely on our spouses to be our worst critics, our best friends, totally supportive.
I was talking to someone the other day, and she said that she reads her books out loud to her husband, because if she told him to just read it, he would just read it quietly and say it's great, but that way she can watch literally every second his reaction to see if it's working or not. I thought that was fascinating. Like,
I generally, my wife is spared from reading my footnotes, but she helps me proofread every single book, which is very important part of my process, because not only am I looking for manuscript variations, it's also a time to sort of pause and say to her or she to me, what's that? And so plop, there's where a note's going to go. So
yeah, I also use experts, and I run sections of the book. So like I like Victorian medicine, so I always stick some in. I run by a doctor too, so literally to make sure that I'm correct in what's happening there. And other experts, so like in the last book, there's a master of the locks of the cam, and I consulted him about the mechanics of the lock. There's a man who is he's in charge of the Historic Locks Museum, which I visited in Rugby, and he knows everything about locks. So he was involved. Yeah, so I get these experts too.
The hardest part of writing these books, by the way, is often figuring out who leave out in the acknowledgments, because it's always a community. It's always a lot of support from a lot of people.
And my very last rank of people that look at it are Sherlockians, and hopefully they'll tell me. Because Sherlockians are dead picky about everything.
Yep. Okay. Bonnie, which of your books is your favorite and why?
Oh gosh, it's usually the last one. Although I think, I have a special fondness for, I think, Unquiet Spirits because of the backstory of Holmes that comes out in there. Just a little hint of it. And also I really had fun researching whiskey. But I don't know. I like each one of them. As I'm working on it, I allow myself to get, totally involved. So maybe the last one, I don't know.
I mean, that seems reasonable, right? It's your most recent baby, so that's great. All right, and the last question I think we have for both of you this afternoon is, do you set up a schedule during the day or night for writing? So you want to tell us kind of what your typical writing day looks like?
Les, do you want to go first, or?
Well, then you're a more serious writer, Bonnie. You go first. So
I write 7 days a week, and I get up and I have black coffee and I start writing. And I usually have a goal, and it's usually a word count. I work on Scrivener, so I have a running total of the whole manuscript. I have a total for the day, and I have goals for both of those. So, and there's a little, kind of a temperature gauge that shows you where you are in your goals. So I do, I hit my word count daily, and I'm pretty intense about it. And so that will take me anywhere from, 2 to 8 hours, sometimes more. And, take breaks if it's going a long time. But I write 7 days a week.
So you don't ever just count out like, this is a bad day, I just need to start again tomorrow?
No, I write through bad days because I in order to finish, I don't judge while I'm drafting. I just, there's several, parts of the process, but the first draft is just get it done, get the word count done, get the arc of the story, figure out the things where the big high points and low points are, and develop the characters. And then I take multiple passes through it again for historical accuracy, accuracy of the location, and really fine tuning the deductions. Some scenes, happen pretty quickly. Usually the character scenes are really easy for me. But so I have a scene in the Three Locks where there's a murder that takes place on stage while everyone is watching, an escape artist, and he self-immolates inside a thing, inside a cauldron of death. It was the cauldron. And then Holmes figures out what happened. And I probably spent 3 weeks on that one chapter about how he figures out what happened. So it varies.
Yeah.
Mine is completely different. I mean, nonfiction is a totally different approach. I find it's in a sense, it's more or less obsessive in some ways. For me, it's almost like a job. I mean, I'm a lawyer during the day, so the writing for me is nights and weekends, but I can spend 5 hours on a single footnote or 20 minutes. And it just depends on sort of how obsessed I get with the subject. But it's very different from fiction writing in that I can sort of put it down. I can spend a half an hour, write a note, put it aside, and pick up the whole writing the next day and spend 4 hours. So it's very different from Bonnie's really more like a full-time writer. This for me is just a hobby.
I think of it is my job, and it is my passion too. So yes, I am a full-time, I am a full-time writer. Yeah.
So I have a question for both of you. Where did your love for Sherlock Holmes come from? Was it books early on, or what did you read as in your formative years? Was it Sherlock or other things that grew this love of writing?
Well, for me, I always was an avid reader, and as a kid, I read a lot of what we call boys' adventure stories because they were fun and exciting. And I read a lot of English, the Jane Eyre and all those. And then, just growing up in the 60s, there was a lot of English culture as at the forefront of, popular culture at the time. Of course, Haley Mills and the Beatles and the Ipcris File and James Bond. And, there was this whole mystique of British everything. And I think I was an Anglophile since the time I was a little kid for these reasons. But it was always the original Holmes stories by Conan Doyle that drew me in.
How about
For me, it was the Baring Gould. It was the Baring Gould annotated edition. I discovered it in law school. Before that, I had read really almost 99% of my reading was science fiction. And I discovered the annotations, and I paid attention to the Holmes stories and just fell in love. Just said, this is for me. Subscribed to the Baker Street Journal right away, and began reading scholarship as well as the stories. So.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, well, on that note, I think that we're done for this afternoon. I'm going to get back to work helping customers. It was a rare, but a little bit stressful treat doing this from the store, but it all worked out. So thank you both so much for joining us this afternoon. As I said, I ran up front and grabbed the beautiful Sherlock and Watson book plates. So there's the book plate that we have to go along with the 3 locks. Bonnie's new book. And as I said, we always stock Les's anthologies. So there's a link in the comments should you want to order. All right. That's it for today. Everyone have a great afternoon. And we really appreciate your time and for tuning in. Bye.
Thanks, McKenna.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Here.
Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure. Bye.